Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. A while ago, I made a video about how I moved from Voodoo to Cell, and so now let's get into the nitty-gritty for our Cell guide. Each of the chapters is going to go over the different sections and some of the big functionality to help you get the most out of this add-on. Personally, I switched to it because it is just better performance, better FPS for me than I had had experience with Voodoo, and the customization options are fantastic and very easy to get into. If you'd like my profile, you can find it linked in the description down below, and you can import it right here on this About page. You can see it right in the top right, and you can, of course, move any of these settings by just clicking on any of these at the top and then dragging and dropping. At the very bottom, imports and exports for all settings. You would just hit the import button here, grab my paste bin, and then paste it on in there, and you'd be all good to go. Cell, unlike some of the other add-ons for RAID frames, also has this excellent code snippet feature where you can add custom code to make adjustments to the frames and how they work. The main thing that I've used with these frames is to be able to sort my RAID frames so that I'm always in the first position. Cell is fantastic because they also have an entire Discord where a lot of people have been going after very specific niche things that they really enjoy with their frames and using the add-on to leverage that potential. So if you haven't already, make sure you're joining in their Discord. You can find it linked right here at the bottom of the About section. They have an entire section dedicated to snippets. Go through that first, as it'll give you a lot of specifics for how they work, how to get them all set up, how to get them rolling. It's fantastic. There, of course, are going to be quite a bit of adjustments you might want to be making depending on how your computer is going to be set up, and a lot of those can be done here in the appearance section, where not only are you going to have the scale adjustments that you're going to be doing, you also have a lot of adjustments for things like the textures themselves. Personally, I really like the smoother one, but of course you can have, darker frames, you can have all kinds of adjustments that you'd like to be able to have on this one. You also have some very important aura icon options right here, which one of the big things when you import Cell is that they have a bounce, if you see on the preview to the right, where whenever abilities get refreshed or increase in stacks, they do that little bounce that you just saw. And that bounce is completely removable if you don't want it. This is the play icon animation right here under the aura icon options. So you can simply just say never if you don't want to. If you do, you can have the option there. But that's one of the new things that you'll probably end up seeing that other add-ons don't usually do. At the very bottom, you can, of course, change any of the colors for the debuffs that you might have, whether they're curses or bleeds or anything, and we're going to show that a little bit later when it comes to the indicator section. But overall, this setup is pretty straightforward. If you're importing my profile, I use a 1440 monitor that's like 24 inches, so you might need to adjust your scale settings, but we'll also talk about that when we get into some of the layouts. The general tab is very straightforward. It starts by showing, do you want to actually see these frames when you're solo, in a party, in a raid? Do you want to hide the Blizzard default frames, the Blizzard raid frames? If you are happy with your positioning, this is where you're also going to be able to lock your frames so that you are not going to be able to move them around or anything. You can simply uncheck it, and then you can move it around to your heart's content. Great. This fade out menu button, you might want to turn this off when you first get the add-on, because a lot of people don't know that you have to click in this top left section in order to actually drag it around, move it around, and you're going to use this in what we'll talk about in the spotlight menu to actually pull up some more additional options. So keep an eye on that one, as it does go pretty well. There's also a nickname section. If you ever wanted to give your raiders nicknames on their frames, this is the area that you'd be able to do it. I have a couple in my section if you ever want to see them and have them imported. And of course, after that, there's some tooltips that you can have on hand if you want them enabled, hidden in combat, a few different extra settings that are completely customizable depending on what you need. The increase health update rate, this is pretty good, but it definitely does use more CPU usage, and I do not think it's actually necessary to play well. It's kind of like a higher refresh rate on what you might have out of details, where the frames might populate from 80% to 41% and then 40% a little bit faster, but it definitely feels like you get a bit more of a chug in your system. And honestly, once a big hit goes out, it's pretty noticeable whether they need healing, don't need healing. Didn't affect my gameplay at all having this off. Personally, I don't really recommend having it on because it did notice a bit more of an FPS performance drop. Now, if you're a Voodoo user, you might be familiar with click casting. And of course, Cell has it built in right here where you can set up your profiles per spec, which is what I do. And I have the smart res on so I can mass res whenever I need to if a target is actually going to be dead. You can also set it up to automatically combat res if you would like to as well. Personally, I just set a specific keybind for my battle reses, so I don't do that, but again, up to you. The nice thing about it is there's 3 different sections here in the middle. Actually, they added even more. Let's go. The 3 sections that I've used has been general, spell, and macro. And so the general section is how you can target your frames, focus your frames, assist, have the menu pull up. For example, if you alt right click, which is what I have, this pulls up the regular right click that the game has. If you alt left click, it then populates your target section, which you can see right here. So you can set those up however you'd like. And then the spell section, which I really love, already has a drop down of all of your baseline abilities, all of your talented abilities that you have on hand, so that you can very easily just sort through everything you like. You can also alphabetize it if you so choose by just dragging around the frame and moving it around as you would like. It's very, very easy to get into. And finally, the third section I really want to talk about is this macro section. I guess they've changed it to custom now, but it should be just macros. Anyway. Oh, it actually goes through all of our macros now. That's actually really sick. So before, what it would do is you would have a macro section, and what it would actually do is it would say, hey, /use @mouse over 9, which is, I think it's my wrists, which is the item. If, for example, you wanted to have it go to 13, that is the first trinket that you have in your slot. So if you have access to a trinket that you wanted to utilize or something like that, it'd be in the 13th slot here or the 14th slot there. So usually what I do for Mythic Plus, for example, is I'll have my ward trinket or any on-use defensive trinket. I'll always put that in like the 13th slot, for example. For Seedling, even though it is an on-use, I usually have a keybind for it. So it's a little bit different, since usually I'm targeting somebody with a ward-type trinket, and for something like Seedling, I'm just placing it onto the ground. It also looks like now they've changed it so that the item is actually the custom that I had before. So if you wanted to have Trinket 1, Trinket 2, waist, wrists, any of those, or a specific item, you could always do those things as well. The difference being that if you wanted to have a specific item, like a specific trinket, then hitting that keybind would activate only that specific trinket. But if you're using, let's say, a ward trinket, and it's going to kind of change every season, the way we had Leaf in Season 3, and then we had Ward in Season 4, then you could just have it as the same slot. So you have a lot of options there for how you'd like to be able to set it up. When it comes to actually key binding abilities, you just click right here, and then you can press any key to be able to bind it, whether it's scroll up, scroll down, middle mouse, right click. All of those things are at your disposal. The add-on click itself does not work with cell functionality. So when it comes to healing ads, I'll talk about that in just a sec. There's another way around it, which is still very effective, which I like. So now that we got some of the general settings done, let's get into the nitty gritty. In the layouts tab here at the top is where you are going to start building out different size raid frames for different needs that you have. And you can see right here on the right side, you're going to have the layout auto switch. So when you're in a specific role, like a tank, healer, DPS, you can have a profile set up. Whether you're in a specific spec, you can also have a specific profile set up. Personally, I'm just always healing, so I have the general healer profile, okay? I have 3 profiles that I have right here. I have Key, Mythic Raid, and the Normie Raid setup. And so as a result, in a solo environment when I'm alone, I set it up for keys. Party, set it up for keys. Raid in the outdoor environment. This is the larger raid sizes, and I can show you as well with this preview functionality, where if I wanted to go up to, let's say, 6, then I could go into this raid setup here. And then in the open raid, killing a world boss, something like that, I would have larger frames that I would actually end up be working with. Also, if you're in an arena, battleground, mythic raid instances, you have all that sort of customization on hand. Personally, I sort by role, and with the sort by role setting, I prioritize healers, tanks, and DPS. If you're interested in always prioritizing yourself first by role, go back to the About section chapter because we talk about that with the code snippets. In this section here, you're of course going to be adjusting the width, the height, the power bar size, all of that fun stuff as you'd like it. And again, using the previews here up at the top, if you wanted to sort it based off of a raid size, for example, you could set it up for the preview to raid, adjust it as to where you are wanting it to sit onto your frames, fine-tune all of those little things from there. And of course, once you set them and save them, then you can go back to sections like I believe it's in the general section, lock those frames so that they're always going to be in the same place, the same time, constantly. If you wanted to make some adjustments to power bars, this is also kind of weird that it's here, but For example, if you do not want to see Hunter's focus, or you do not want to see, Tank's energy or something along those lines, all you have to do is click on these sections, gray them out, and then you're not going to ever see them ever again. I believe for my raid profile, if I'm not mistaken, my mythic raid profile, yeah, I've grayed out everybody's resources except for healers, as an example. Mythic Plus, I don't really mind too much. But in a raid, I don't want to have that much clutter. I just only want to see healers mana. And so it's a really good option that you have if you want to flex into it. Now, I mentioned before about ad healing. So one of the big benefits of an add-on like Click or default Blizzard Click casting is you can go and heal NPCs that are not on your raid frames. In order to counter this, you have pet frames if you really wanted them to be there. Personally, I don't, so I don't actually show them. You have NPC frames, which will populate if you're in a boss fight like Chromie, where the NPC is always going to be on like that boss frame where it'll show like Iridicron, and then below it'll show Chromie or something. The problem is, Farak ads do not show on NPC frames, and so we are left with the Spotlight frames. What you want to be doing here is enabling these, and this is how you are basically going to be healing any sort of NPC, any sort of ad, no matter what you have going on. So I'll enable it right here, locate it on my frame, and then as a result, I'm going to unhide it, I think is what I need to be doing, so that I can then see the frame and pull it up. And right here, you can left click it and it opens up the menu. As you are selecting all of these boxes, you have a ton of options of how you want to set this up. What you want to do is add a focus bar right here. And so that whenever you are positioning it and have it where you want it to be, and of course I can set it back to hide right here, you're then able to close out the frame, and then you're going to have a bar. I think you have to right click it here to, there we go. You have to left click it there. Then you're going to hide it, and then you're going to use a macro, which I'll link in the description down below. You can see it right here on the screen if you wanted to, where all you do is focus that target mouse over. And so I have it bound to, I think it's Control 3. So what I do is I Control 3. I then have it populating in this little focus tab right here. And then I can go cast nice little heals on our boy George. Thanks, George. It does add an extra step into the equation where you have to mouse over a target, click a bind, and then you're going to be able to cast spells onto them. But it's kind of the best option of what I've seen, and it also allows you to maintain your current target, which if you're playing like a Disc Priest or a Monk that you want to actively be attacking your target, well, it helps that you don't have to actually shift or move those around. Now, as we get ourselves ready for the indicator section, this is a deep section with a lot of customization. And if you're, of course, making multiple different profiles like I personally have for keys, for raids, for mythic raids, and so on, you are also going to have a lot of customization for all of the indicators you want for raids, don't want for raids, don't want for M+, or do want for M+. And so what I would advise you do is to start by setting up your profile for one spec. And for me, I have it set up for the key spec. Now, if I had set it up for the like and subscribe spec and you click the show all in the preview, it looks like a freaking mess, right? It's just all over the place. And so what you want to be doing is starting it up with the key profile. And you can also see whenever you go to the show all feature that things are not too overlappy, right? They're in their specific positions depending on what you need. And so what I end up doing is I made my Mythic Plus key profile first, and then I use this sync feature, which is basically a copy paste, okay? It's copying from key to whatever you have here. So if you take it from key and you sync with like and subscribe, actually I'll do the opposite, excuse me. If I'm in the like and subscribe feature and I sync it with the key section, all the indicators of like and subscribe will be replaced with those in key. I hit yes, and as a result, I have a big jumbled mess because this is a smaller size frame. And so what I would then do is go to each of these sections if I like how everything's formatted and then shrink it down to fit. And so that way, all you have to do is adjust the size of things. So if you have a Mythic Plus profile that has larger frames, you then sync it with raid frames that are going to be smaller frames. Then you're going to go to each of the sections in turn and find their sizing options, reduce the size to be able to fit what your needs are, and then you'll be able to continue on from there. Now, as I mentioned, the preview feature is incredibly, incredibly nice. You also have the scale adjustments that you can make it absolutely freaking massive, so you can fine-tune each little pixel so that it goes where exactly you'd like to be. And whenever you're adjusting something like your name text, you can see show all and see how your name fits around all of the other sections that you have on hand. So let's go through some of the important features that I have and the ones that I don't have. Name text, pretty straightforward. Status text, this one is just going to show whether you're AFK, dead, having a drink, accepted, declined, all of that fun stuff. Totally optional if you'd like it. Health text, again, more of an optional thing if you prefer it. I also have a section which hides it if it's empty. I'm kind of going back and forth on actually showing the health percentage if I really wanted to. Power text is how much mana or energy or something like that you might have. I don't really think it's that important, and it probably takes up a lot of time and space when you're showing it for multiple different people. Health threshold for our priest gamers out there is by default set to 35% for our good old powered life. If you'd like something like this, I'm not a huge fan of it personally, but if you didn't want to have a glow weak aura, for example, to show powered life, this would be the area where you could do it. Status icons for things like battle res, looking for group, extra little icons that you have on hand, pretty self-explanatory. Role icons are pretty cool because not only do they have the default settings, Blizzard settings you could have on hand here, but you could actually just go and have your own custom settings if you wanted to. You could have a picture of Costco's hot dogs and pizza as the tank and healer icons if you really wanted to. A lot of customization on that. Leader icons, straightforward. Ready check icons are very straightforward as well. Raid icons, if somebody is marked by a raid icon itself, if somebody actually is marked by a skull, you'll then be able to move your frame and see, hey, this person's marked by skull. Okay, hey, this person is marked by square. And then you're able to sort it as you see fit on that end. Going through it, raid icons, this is more for like the target itself. I don't actually mess with that. There's multiple different ways to see aggro. You can have it as a blinking light on the target. You can have it as a bar above the target. Personally, I just like seeing the border so that I know if there's a red border around the target, they might be getting meleeed, and that goes really well for Mythic Plus healing in general. A shield bar, I think, is incredibly important. I use it to show what I call overshields. So if a target is full HP, and then I want to see how much extra shield value they have, the default UI will show this right slight white bar onto the edge. Doesn't help that I'm on a priest, but it'll show this little bar on the edge, but you don't know how much it is. So if you know this massive hit is going to be coming, you would like to know, oh, hey, like one person has a large shield, one person doesn't have a large shield. That person with the smaller shield's gonna need more healing, going to need more support. AoE healing is like an extra texture that shows at the top when somebody gets hit by an AoE effect. I personally don't think this is too valuable, so I have it off by default. Again, you can just hit the enabled or unenabled section right here to make those adjustments. This next section is very important. This is the external and defensive cooldown sections. And so these settings, and you're going to see it in this indicator section tab, these settings affect the externals and defensives tab. So in the externals tab, if I wanted to deselect an option, I just click on it and then it doesn't show anymore. If I just wanted to exclude Blessing of Spell Warding, for example, you also have the custom section down here at the bottom where you can input a spell ID. What I do there is I just go to Wowhead, I pull it right from the talent section or like the talent trees. So whenever you go to Wowhead, at the like very top in like the search bar, it'll show you spell ID equals 8675309 and it's Shield Wall or something along those lines. The really important thing about the externals and defensives tab is that both of these will end up feeding into the externals and defensives tab. So I have externals and defensives turned off, and I actually have them rolled in together into one. Whether or not they're taking a pain sup or using an AMS, I will just be able to see what defensive that they have, and I'll be able to have it in the exact same spot on the frames every single time. This kind of saves me from like looking in one direction for one and one direction for another. As far as I'm concerned, they are things that keep you alive, so I feel personally good about having them more merged together. Of course, there's a lot of options that you have on this one. I show the duration text when it is below 50%, so I want to see the last 5 seconds or so of the duration to know specifically when it's about to end. There's also going to be the extra animations to show when those are going out onto the target. As you can see, when I paint up myself here, as it's ticking down at the very end of the duration, I'm then able to start seeing that final like text getting added into it. There's a lot of customization options for the duration font, the stack font, if there are multiple stacks of a defensive that you have on hand. There's a lot of customization you have with all of these to be able to, again, fine tune it how you like. So make sure you're using that show all feature so that you can make sure everything is sort of separated in the areas that you actually want them to be at. Tank of Active Mitigation basically shows Bone Shield, Demon Spikes, things like that. Again, optional if you'd like it, especially for a Mythic Plus environment. I don't think it's as important to be tracking in a raid, since usually if they don't have their mid up, they kind of just die. So not too heavy of a concern there. The spells, this starts by default by being a health bar of like a gradient half of your health bar. If you wanted to change it to be an entire bar, or to be a solid color, or to not have any of that and just be a little fun icon, it's all available to you depending on what it is that you're actually going to be going after. Personally, I always recommend that you see all these icons, even if you cannot dispel them, because it's just good, even if it's to make like communication, make calls on whether somebody else can help dispel those for you. Debuffs by default, I've always liked to have them in the top right section here. That's how I've had it for many years with Voodoo. And there is a blacklist section if you do not want to see certain things like sated, exhaustion, fatigued, whatever it is you want to call it, fell armor. I add a lot of debuffs to my blacklist, and it's very easy to do this by going down to this blacklist section right here. If you have a debuff that you do not want to see, it'll then be located in the top right. You hit Alt, Control, and then right click. It automatically gets added to the blacklist, and you never have to worry about it again. And again, if you mistakenly blacklist something, all you have to do is go into this debuff section, hit the little X, it'll bring it back into the game, it'll bring it back to you so that you can actually see it, and you don't have to worry once again. Also, having that aura tooltip so that when you mouse over it, you'll actually be able to see what it is, what it does, especially with the new expansion and all of the new effects. It's really helpful to be able to see those things. The raid debuffs feature, this is kind of similar to the externals and defensives crowd. There's actually an entire tab dedicated to raid debuffs, where every single dungeon, every single boss fight will have different relevant mechanics that you have going on. And basically most of them are debuffs, right? Or almost all of them are debuffs. So you'll actually see these debuffs in the top right if you were using like my settings. And if you had them on right here, you would also see them in the middle of your screen. So if you wanted to use both of these features, what I would basically recommend is that you would blacklist in the debuff section, and then you would then show those things in the raid debuff section. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this. I just like to be able to look in the debuff section anyway for anything that's going to be relevant to me, and I blacklist whatever is not relevant. But you might enjoy this more. This might help you see specific mechanics. You can also make sure you turn off every single individual mechanic if you don't want to see them, which is amazing customization, because sometimes there might be areas where, okay, you know, if they get hit by a seed detonation, they're dead anyway, or something like that. Up to you on that end. Personally, I don't have the raid debuffs on it at the moment. Private auras, I have these on, but I never really noticed too much effects from them. The targeted spells section, I might end up using this for the new expansion. Personally, I usually have been using a weak aura that has dungeon targeted spells to know when somebody's being targeted, but this is something that I might flex into and might make some more adjustments to as the expansion goes on. You're again able to change what kind of glow it's going to be and how obnoxious you want it to be, and yeah, it gets to be a lot. So up to you. If this is something that you would like to use, not like to use, it's pretty easy to understand how it's going to work. This is the full list of the effects. You can also make it so it shows all of the spells instead of making it only show glows for these specific spells. So lots of customization you have there. Target counter, I think this is just for showing how many enemies is targeting that tank usually. I don't really see much point in that. Crowd control is a bit more of a PvP thing, but you have a lot of customization if you want it to show all of those things, so it's pretty cool. When it comes to the action setting, this kind of just adds a little like swoosh if you wanted to see it, where if somebody hits a health pod or hits a health stone or something along those lines, you'll then be able to see, oh, they hit a health stone, it's a nice green line. Oh, they hit a health pod, it's a little blue line. Oh, they DPS pods, they have a little arrow attached to them. Good customization onto this one. There's even extra sections where you can add additional effects so that you know, hey, somebody used a defensive, somebody used a personal, and it's not only going to populate this externals and defensives tab, but it also adds an extra animation or shine onto your screen. Very nice to be able to customize. Missing buffs for, you know, fortitude and arcane intellect, all that fun stuff. You can always just set it to only showing the buffs that you apply, so you don't have to worry about it. It's a great way to get it set up. This last section of indicators is enormously important. This is where you're going to set up your healing over time effects or your buffs that you're applying to your allies. So by default, again, there's options around this. I'll show you in a sec. By default, every healing over time effect is added into the same section, okay? And there is a track by name, which you want to have selected, because then it allows you to have a priority list for all of these buffs. So, for example, if you are playing a priest, you're going to have Atonement, then Shield, then Prayer of Mending, then Renew, right? So, as you apply those buffs, you have Atonement first, then Shield, and then you have Renew. Everything shifts to the side. And as a result, you can set whatever order it is that you prefer for all of these effects. I know by default, Primordial Wave, for example, it doesn't show. You can always add extra effects by hitting this little plus sign. And then usually, again, what I do is open up Wowhead, pull the buff directly from the talents. Or if you have a specific add-on, I think it's called Spell ID or like ID tip, you can also just mouse over that effect and then see that buff as well. One of the most frequent questions I get about the add-on is, what if you don't want to play this way? What if you actually want to have different specific sections for all of your effects? Well, this is where you create new indicators to be able to do that. So if you wanted to make a new buff indicator and you wanted to make it change the entire color of your bar, you wanted to change the entire bar to show that I have Atonement on that target. Well, simple. You just set it to color, just name it to like and subscribe. Hit yes, and then you can set what kind of color that you'd like, whether it's a solid color, a gradient, healing over time, change over time, class color effect, whatever you might do. Track it by the name, and then enter in that buff. So for Atonement, it's 81749. Hit enter right there, apply Atonement to yourself, and then the entire bar is going to be this nice bit of reddish, maroon, purpley thing, whatever. And you can, of course, make all the adjustments that you like from there. A really cool thing that you can do as well is you can then make a new indicator for an icon, right? Or actually what I would recommend is multiple icons. So what you can do here with making a icon is you can set it to Hot 2. It's really good if you play multiple different healers. So what you can do is you can have 81749 for good old Atonement, and you apply Atonement onto this, track it by name so that it actually shows up, and it's going to be in the top right every single time, no matter what. But what if you also wanted to see something for an alt character? Well, this is where you can go again into Wowhead or wherever it is you would really like to go, and you can type in, I don't know, Rejuvenation. Find the spell ID for something like Rejuve, which is 774. Enter it in right here, and you can see a preview of what it is beforehand. And then you can say, all right, sweet. So I know I'm going to have Atonement in the top right, but whenever I play my Druid, I'm going to have Rejuve in the top right. And then you can kind of go down the line. You can adjust, again, the spacing, the XY axis, the sizing, where you want it to be anchored at. And here's the X and Y axis, so you again can have it right here. Slide it all over the place, wherever it is that you might choose. It will go even off the screen if you wanted it to go off the screen. There's a lot of customization that you can have of those things. And it shows you, again, where it's going to be on the preview without having to interact with the frame and apply it at all if you don't want to. This also, since it is the icon section, has room for multiple different icons. So if I wanted to have only Shield and Atonement bound together, you could do that. If you only wanted one buff per spec, you could also do that as well. If you only wanted it to be one icon no matter what, instead of setting it to what we had as an icons, you would set it to an icon. Single. There's also bars, overlays. There is a ton of customization for all of these effects, depending on what it is that you wanted to do, and it is fan-freaking-tastic to use. Finally, to wrap things up, we have the utility section, which has a lot of optional mechanics. If you wanted to have a battle res timer, you could have an advanced death report. This does definitely take more CPU usage. Buff trackers, ready checks, pull timers, marks, things like that. Fade outs, there's a lot of options. I believe these are also some of the options for AUG if they wanted to have some of these like quick assist, buff monitoring on hand, so you know, for example, what targets you are going to be placing your buffs on and when you're going to be placing the buffs on them. These help you make a lot more of that decision making. And I know there's entire articles in depth about like setting them up to min-max with AUG in the Cell Discord. So once again, check it out by going into either the description of this video or going into the add-on itself. Click on the Discord there, and it's got the link right there for you. Definitely check out like all the in-depth snippets and setups, because people have been writing full-length guides for very specific bits of what you might want to do with the add-on. You can even do it to replace certain weak auras, for example, like making sure you are getting power infusion as like a spell request. The thing here is it would actually require some people to also have Cell themselves, I believe, to actually request it if you weren't using like a weak aura instead. Personally, I just end up using the weak auras because it's a little bit more universal that you have on hand. Otherwise, that's going to be wrapping it up for our Cell guide. If you have any additional questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer them. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, be sure to do so. And huge thank you to our patrons who are making all of this content possible as we get ready for the War Within. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.